here is Lisa LaFlamme.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on this Good Friday at a time when people are certainly looking for any kind of good news. The traditional gatherings for Easter and Passover are on hold, as we all know, replaced by phone and video calls to do whatever we can to prevent the spread of COVID-19. The Prime Minister will deliver his address to the nation shortly and answer reporter questions. We know he spoke with the premiers by phone last night about this evolving pandemic and the medical supplies needed to keep frontline workers safe. So we're going to talk about that this morning. Around the world, well over 1.6 million people have now been infected with the virus, and sometime today we will reach 100,000 people dead, very close to that sad milestone right now. But there is some good news. 365,000 people have recovered. In this country, we are at over 21,000 cases now. Ontario just added 478 new infections to that tally today and 22 more deaths, which means the total dead now is 531. And again, very important to remember that 5,500 people have recovered in Canada. So we don't want to forget the fact that people are getting better from this. CTV's infectious disease specialist, Dr. Abdu Sharkawi, is working at Toronto Western. There you are, as you are every single morning for us, and we thank you so much for joining us. And Dr. Sharkawi, we've just seen Ontario's latest number, 478 new cases, and one of the things that stood out for me, 53% of those cases are in Greater Toronto area, so public health units. So give us a perspective from inside Toronto hospitals right now, whether we're seeing things still manageable at this moment.
Well, at this very moment in time, they are manageable, but that is only because we have really done as much as we can in terms of a contingency plan with coverage for each other and dedicated COVID assignments for different parts of our healthcare team. But we are seeing an increasing number of cases from these institutional settings, whether they're long-term care facilities, mental health institutions, etc. And Toronto being as densely populated as it is, it certainly doesn't surprise me that we're seeing the majority of cases from Ontario coming from here.
So we know that last night all of our political leaders, premiers, provinces, territories, and the Prime Minister had a late-night phone call about medical supplies. So put us in the picture where you are right now. What is the situation when it comes to getting the things you need? We talk about this so much, but are you seeing an improvement in the hospitals with the protective equipment you need?
Well, not as yet. To be honest, we are still being very judicious with our use of masks, with our use of face shields. We haven't run out. I know that there are plans for imminent arrival of different supplies, including both N95 masks and face shields and the like, but it simply hasn't arrived as yet. We're very anxious, waiting to see when that will happen.
And I think there's a lot of people anxious to see an increase in testing capacity, specifically in the province of Ontario, which per capita is so much lower than the rest of the country, and it is key to tracking this spread. So, you know, I know this is a work in progress, but there have been any emergency measures at your hospital to expedite the testing? I mean, we still look at South Korea as the gold standard of testing. Are we anywhere close to improving this problem?
No, we're not. But the good news is we have the capacity to do it. So this is not a resource issue as much as it is a messaging issue that needs to change, and it needs to change right away. And what I mean by that is we simply have to expand our criteria for testing and not limit it to the absolute highest risk categories of people. We have to start allowing people who work within the public domain, retail grocery store employees, people who work in public transit, they need to be tested. We have to make sure that anybody who is at risk for this, who's not just sitting at home like an everyday citizen, needs to get access for testing. And there are a lot of advocacy initiatives going on right now to try and formalize changing that testing criteria. I'm hopeful that that will have an impact, but this is not a resource issue. Let's make no mistake about that. we can do this, and we should in the next week or two.
You know, you talk about changing criteria, and there's a lot of talk right now about this pinprick blood test. Health Canada says it is not ready, but it's going gangbusters in the UK and Germany. And I know it doesn't detect the virus itself, but it does find the antibodies that produce to fight coronavirus. So first of all, explain it to us, even for those who don't have symptoms, why this would be beneficial right now.
Well, the basis of an antibody test is to tell you, number one, whether you've been exposed, and hopefully if it's a two-tiered antibody test, it can reveal the antibody that tells you that you have become immune. And obviously the benefits of that for anyone caring for sick patients or anyone who's vulnerable is intuitive. Certainly for frontline healthcare workers, it would help us know that if we're putting someone at risk, you know, maybe we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. Or conversely, if we're immune, we can feel comforted in knowing we're not putting anyone at risk. And that would apply to anyone caring for an elderly parent at home or someone working in a long-term care facility. The problem with having it rolled out here in Canada is we have to remember that this needs to be validated, and we have to have a pretty good level of certainty that it's accurate and that it doesn't have what we call a false negative rate, which means that the test says that you are, or a false positive rate, which says you are immune when in fact you are not, and then subject people to risk if they're exposing themselves to others. So this takes a little bit of time. We want to make sure that when it's rolled out, it is accurate and can be used widely here within Canada. I'm hopeful that'll be at some time in the next few weeks.
Okay, we are all watching that very closely, and all of these vaccine tests that are going on around the world, and everyone's sort of praying that one of them is the right one, although we know it is still a year, 18 months away. But Dr. Sharkawi, we'll check back in with you throughout the hour. But while we're waiting for the Prime Minister, that port shot sits there. It is must mean that we're close when that shot pops up. So we're about 10 minutes away. Let's go to Molly Thomas in Ottawa, where the Commons and the Senate will be recalled, Molly, for a strip-down session on Saturday. So this is all about getting the wage subsidy legislation passed. What can you tell us today?
We're going to be watching, Lisa, for how fast they can get this done. Remember, this is the second emergency session. This one is focused on employers getting that 75% wage subsidy out the door. And the question is, how fast can that be done? We know the finance minister has said before that even after legislation is passed, it could take weeks to get money out the door. And the businesses that we're talking to, I mean, some are on the brink of bankruptcy. Others are paying their employees out of their pocket. They're trying so hard to stay afloat. And the pressure is on to get that money to them to make sure that they, still exist after this crisis. We know in the last emergency session, there was an overnight session and Canadians, accused politicians of playing politics in the midst of a pandemic. And so the pressure is on to see how they can get this done, if they can do it fast. And we know that the Conservatives have been asking for more debates to figure out a way to get people debating and looking at different issues throughout this crisis. Trudeau has mused about a virtual parliament. We'll have to see if they can separate these issues from the wage subsidy, get that passed, or if that's going to tie them up for longer on Saturday.
Yeah, and let's just look at the actual nuts and bolts of it, Molly. We can show everybody a breakdown of just who will be there for that session. 14 Liberal MPs, 11 Conservative MPs. We know the government is sending a plane to pick up some members, Andrew Scheer, for example. 3 Bloc Québécois MPs, 3 NDP MPs, and 1 Green MP. And Molly, I want you to give me what you're hearing from the PMO, if anything, on that they are considering invoking the Emergency Measures Act. That would certainly be a first. What can you tell us about that phone call between the provinces and territories last night, and what the powers would enact for the Prime Minister, what that would trigger?
Lisa, we always have known from the Prime Minister's office that all options are on the table. They've said that from the beginning. But yesterday, we know that the Prime Minister consulted with the premiers and the territorial leaders, asking them if they invoke this act, how exactly would they do it? And so they had that really honest and frank discussion last night. And so, as this situation gets worse, as our healthcare system is coping, as health officials have said, maybe there's more serious consideration to what this could do. This is a sweeping act, Lisa. This is a huge act. It would basically override the powers of provinces. It would override the powers of cities. It would put all of the power into the federal government's hands. And so, of course, there are premiers like the Saskatchewan premier, Ontario premier, that have said, we've done well enough up until now, we don't need this. But there's other premiers like the New Brunswick premier, Blaine Higgs, has been very clear in saying, this would unify our approach. And that could be in everything from supplies, getting supplies of personal protective equipment out to provinces. It could be everything from fines for people that don't listen to orders, stay-at-home orders. These are measures that we've only ever seen in war times and in the October crisis in Canada. And so it would be sweeping. It would change things for sure. We know that the Prime Minister's office is seriously talking about it to the provincial leaders.
Yeah, and we've just heard Dr. Sharkawi say that they still do not have the medical supplies they need inside Canadian hospitals. So this would be about supply, allowing the federal government, as Molly says, to better direct those supplies to the provinces that need it. Molly, thanks so much for that. We'll check back with you. And I want to quickly, before the Prime Minister comes out, let's go to Paul Workman in London to find out how British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is doing. Good morning to you. Paul, I know he's out of intensive care, but what is the actual latest on Boris Johnson's health today?
Good morning, Lisa. Well, the Prime Minister, and the whole country for that matter, went through a very serious health scare. As you were saying, Johnson is now out of intensive care. He's in a general ward, but he's still under fairly close monitoring. Downing Street all week has been saying he's in good spirits. Last night, when this news came out, Downing Street said he is in extremely good spirits. So that's good to hear. Johnson's father was on BBC Radio this morning and spoke pretty bluntly. He essentially said, look, Johnson, quote, almost took one for the team. So there is that good news that Johnson is better. The bad news today is that another 935 deaths have been recorded in the UK. Those are hospital deaths. Does not include people who died and were not in hospital. So those numbers could jump quite a bit later on, Lisa.
Wow, that is just stunning numbers, really horrifying, I'm sure, for everybody. But I mean, we saw these numbers roll through Italy and Spain and France. But I want to ask you, because this is the start of a famous mini break in the UK, the Easter holiday, and the public is heading into another, I guess it's a week almost, but what about those warnings is the public heeding the warning to resist that temptation to be outside? Or are we seeing more intensity when it comes to cracking down on violators?
It's kind of hard to judge. The streets appear empty around the main big grand monuments. The streets in my neighborhood are pretty crowded today. The park this morning was quite crowded around 7:30, 8 o'clock. So it's really hard to get a gauge on it. The police are out in force trying to make sure people don't gather, trying to disperse crowds. And the police have actually been accused of being a little zealous. There were stories this morning that one man was reprimanded for using his front lawn. Some video was shot of the police telling him that, and it was viewed 300,000 times on the internet. Wow. Other police have been were accused this morning of going up and down the aisles, the non-essential aisles in grocery stores, to see what people were there and actually what people were buying. Wow. Lisa.
And I have to say, Paul, your own daughter in Paris shot some footage. I think we have that, if we can show that. Oh, it's other video, but I know your own daughter did shoot footage because you showed it to me this morning. But, the situation there, again, leading Good Friday in Paris, the Easter weekend, it is really impossible to believe the numbers that we're seeing in that city, and yet still people out there on the streets.
It's tough because the weather is so absolutely beautiful, and France does have a very severe lockdown system in place, but a lot of people wanted to go out shopping, and you are allowed to shop under the rules of lockdown. So the streets were crowded in Paris this morning. The same as London, though. A lot of other streets were simply empty. The monuments are all empty. So the question is, what more do you try to do to make sure people stay inside, to make sure people stay safe? I guess like a lot of countries, you start fining people, and certainly France has handed out a lot of fines to people who violate the guideline.
Okay, Paul, thanks for this. We'll check back with you after the Prime Minister. But before we get to him, I want to quickly ask Dr. Sharkawi a very quick question. So we've just heard Boris Johnson is out of ICU and in a general ward. Is that an all clear, or is there still concern that this could deteriorate again? Give us some perspective.
It's certainly encouraging. It sounds like he was in the ICU more out of an abundance of caution for close monitoring as opposed to needing to consider intubation imminently. So hopefully he will continue to improve. There is obviously still the possibility he may deteriorate at some point, but the longer you go without needing intubation, the less likely that those prospects continue. So I'm hopeful the Prime Minister Johnson will get through this just fine.
And we are all watching that very closely. Dr. Sharkawi, thank you so much. I know the Prime Minister is just a few seconds away from coming out the door there. And the key messaging we're hearing today from the Prime Minister, obviously, a lot of it will be about this wage subsidy. The sitting of Parliament tomorrow on an Easter Saturday to suggest that they will be bringing in MPs from across the country on a reduced level, obviously, is extremely significant. And Avery, I think you're there too. Obviously, there are a lot of people who are sort of waiting for the Prime Minister to give them clearer understanding on just when those shipments are going to arrive. We hear a lot about timing, but not a lot about specifics of supplies.
No, and we've heard, from personal support workers who've been begging for the ability to wear equipment when they're caring for elderly and long-term care facilities. And finally, in Ontario, at least getting the all clear to do that now.
Many Canadians, whether you mark Good Friday or Passover, Easter, Tamil New Year, or Vaisakhi, usually this is a time we spend together. You might go to church or to temple or to volunteer. Last year, when I served a community lunch in Hamilton, I saw just how much people come together over these next few days. But right now, this weekend is going to be very different. You'll have to stay home. You'll have to Skype that big family dinner. And the Easter egg hunt, well, it'll have to happen around the house instead of around the neighborhood. I want to take a moment on that to have a word with kids out there. The Easter Bunny has a big job to do this year, and maybe there's something you can do to help. Ask your parents to let you put up a picture in the window to bring some extra chocolate for nurses and doctors. They need a lot of energy to keep us all safe, and this is how you can help them to do their job. Peu importe notre âge, on a tous notre rôle à jouer.
We all have a role to play
to
fight coronavirus. Earlier this week, I've mentioned that Health Canada launched a call for volunteers to help our frontline workers. And already over 27,000 people have registered to help and give them a little break. Across the country, you're numerous to do your part, and I want to thank you. You're there one for the other, and I know that together we will get through this trial.
These are tough times, but you don't have to go through them alone. If you've lost your job and are having troubles making ends meet, you can apply for the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Millions of people have already had their claim processed, and they're getting their $2,000 deposit. Remember, you can apply today or this weekend if you haven't done so yet by going to canada.ca or calling 1-800-959-2041. If you own a small business and are struggling to pay the bills or pay your staff, we launched the Canada Emergency Business Account yesterday. You can now get a $40,000 interest-free loan through your bank or credit union. And if you repay it within 2 years, 25%, up to $10,000 of that loan is forgivable. It'll only take a few days for you to receive the full amount in your account. That's money you can use for whatever you need, whether it's monthly expenses or paying employees. On that note, we're getting closer to implementing the wage subsidy, too. We're working with other parties to get this in place as quickly as possible. Tomorrow, we're bringing back the House of Commons to pass the largest economic measures Canada has seen since World War II. It's really important, despite a time of crisis, in fact, because of a time of crisis, that our institutions remain strong and our democratic principles continue. Therefore, this address to Canadians tomorrow will be a little later and from the floor of the House of Commons. And on that note, I'll be taking Sunday and Monday with Sophie and the kids. But I'll be back Tuesday with more updates on how we're helping you. If you just feel overwhelmed, we'll soon have more to say about how you can access resources that can help. If you're in crisis, reach out, lean on each other, and know that we will get through this together. All across the country, there are stories of people stepping up to do their part. To ensure that Canadians are safe and our frontline workers have the support they need, we're helping companies join in the effort. Look no further than Fluid Energy from Alberta. They will produce over 1 million liters of hand sanitizer each month, with shipments starting as early as next week. We've invested in this large-scale production as part of our plan to have enough vital supplies produced right here at home. When Canadians work together, we get things done.
Last night, I discussed once again with the Vice Prime Minister Freeland and the premiers of the provinces and territories. And right off the start of the discussion, we had many people joining the Team Canada. We're all on the same line, all of us, with the premiers of every province, working to ensure your safety. During the long weekend, we will all have to stay home. We cannot have guests for dinner, and we will have to be creative in order to organize an egg hunt inside the house. But it's not because we're physically separated that we cannot be there one for the other. Organizing a family dinner on FaceTime, call your friends, and if you have the means, make a gift to an organization. This long Easter weekend won't be like the others, but I know, however, that will be filled with joy, with laughter and love. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll now open the floor for questions. Go to the phone line. One question, one follow-up. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. First question, Mike Blanchfield, the Canadian Press. Line is open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Happy Easter, and whatever else is on your plate. G20 energy ministers are meeting today, as you know, and I'm just wondering what Canada's plan is for playing its role with other countries in the G20 after what OPEC did to cut production and to try to boost oil prices. What's Canada going to be doing?
Canada is part of the discussion, obviously, with the G20 energy ministers. Minister O'Regan is sharing our perspective and the challenges that we're going through in Canada, from Newfoundland to Alberta and Saskatchewan. We're going to continue to work because we recognize that this is a global challenge for many, many different countries, and having a concerted approach is extremely important. We noted what the OPEC countries did yesterday, and I know that's going to be a subject of discussion at the G20 energy meetings conversation today. Okay.
We are part of these conversations with the energy ministers of the G20. Yesterday, we noted that what the OPEC country did, and those discussions continue because Canada is strongly affected by this oil production issue.
Prime Minister, so what do you see Canada doing? Do you see it cutting production along with these OPEC countries? If so, what effect would that have in Canada?
As we know, Alberta has already curtailed production and has for some time now. We're going to continue to look to make sure that other countries are doing their part and that people understand that the most important thing through this is to ensure that families and workers across the country and indeed around the world are getting the support they need to get through this crisis safely.
Next question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, M. Trudeau. J'aimerais
Mr. Trudeau, I'd like to come back on this conference call you had with the provinces yesterday. What was the discussion on the use of Emergency Measures Act? We understand it's to spread the equipment to across the country, but you said that the provinces were sharing pretty well, and provinces accepted to collaborate to the hardest hit regions. So should we understand that if you bring this back on the table, it's because the collaboration between provinces starts to be not as good as it was, and you feel the need to intervene? I can underline that the collaboration continues and even is better between the provinces. We see that it's a historical moment where all the premiers from provinces and territories are aligned to work together. Now, the law on emergency, or the Emergency Act, has a pretty formal and robust requirements in terms of consultation, and we're talking about this just in case we need one day to bring it up. So we don't need it now, and we hope that we won't need it. Now, the way our country works is that provinces have emergency measures that they've put in place, and if those measures are not enough in the provinces, then the federal government has emergency measures that we can add to. But for now, it's not necessary, and we hope, all of us, that it won't be necessary. As a follow-up on this Emergency Measure Act, could it allow, in terms of procurement and medical equipment, could this act allow you to centralize the purchase of equipment and increase the Canadian purchasing power, and maybe put the problem a bit not as heavy as it is? The procurement thing is not an issue of power purchase or purchasing power or costs. The costs are augmenting. The difficulty is that different provinces and even hospitals have themselves connections with producers across and manufacturers across the world, and they are using those contacts, those connections, in order to try to get the equipment they need, on top of all the efforts that are made across the country and by provinces. Now, it's not a bad thing that everyone is looking at what can be done, while making sure that we are all coordinating and finding out about what works and how it works. It's an effort of coordination that we are doing right now, and there's a lot of collaboration, and for this, we don't need to go to the Emergency Measure Act. The collaboration is really strong at this point.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Steve Scheer, Reuters. Line is open.
Hello, Prime Minister. Good morning. There's a story out today saying that the Bank of Canada Governor Polas was not asked to extend his mandate, and I was wondering, I know there's a selection process in progress and that it's not over, but ultimately it is the government that decides. I'm just wondering if you think it makes sense for the current governor to stay on a bit longer to help underpin confidence during this crisis. Thank you.
This is an extremely important question, because we know the important role that the Bank of Canada has in leading on monetary policy that is an essential part of our handling of this economic crisis related to COVID-19. The government has many fiscal measures, but a strong Bank of Canada is essential in getting us through this as well. And Governor Polas, as always, has done an extraordinary job and continues to do an extraordinary job. The process is ongoing, and decisions haven't been made as to what the next steps are.
We acknowledge how it's important for the Bank of Canada to have a role, a central role. When it comes to the Canadian response to this economic challenge caused by COVID-19, Governor Polas is an amazing man who has always been excellent in his job and demonstrates even more excellence during these real challenge. And regarding succession, there's no decision made at this point.
Follow up, Steve?
Yeah, if I could just follow up, can you give us an idea when that decision might be made?
The discussions and reflections are ongoing.
Thank you. One more question, please, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Catherine Lévesque, La Presse canadienne. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Juste pour revenir sur la loi.
Just to go back on the Emergency Measure Act, when and what type of case you would need it? There are different scenarios that we've discussed already with the different provinces, whether it's through about the challenges for procurement or restrict even more the movement of Canadians. There are different measures that we could theoretically look at, but those are not measures that are currently necessary, and even in the way that provinces are or can take their decisions and take the measures that they need, the tools that the federal government has currently, such as the Quarantine Act. We hope we won't need to use the Emergency Measure Act, and it would be our preference, actually.
I think there are a number of tools that the Emergencies Act provides for, much stronger controls on distribution of necessary medical supplies and equipment, for example, or further restrictions on travel or on Canadians' freedoms. But as I said, the way our country works is that provinces have Emergencies Act that they can bring in with very strong measures that they have all done. If at one point those measures are insufficient to do the things that are needed to do, and all the tools that the federal government has at its disposal are insufficient to bring forward measures that are deemed necessary, then and only then do we consider the Emergency Measures Act. But as I've said, it is our hope that we don't have to use it ever. We are seeing that the collaboration, the partnership among provinces and territories, and the way we're moving forward on this means that we might not ever have to use the Emergencies Act, and that would be our preference.
And Sweetie?
Oui. Donc, ça fait presque un mois que votre gouvernement...
It's been a month now, close to a month, that your government has unveiled the first billions of promise to fight COVID-19. But what did your ministers and you have learned in the last month? And are there already lessons to take out of this? What we had to do in the last month was to move extremely fast, to create new methods, new programs to deliver help to many Canadians. Of course, we have our capacity to do all this was tested during the last weeks, but we were able to do a lot so that Canadians this week get help. And we acknowledge as well that every time we moved quickly to help as much as people as possible, as quickly as possible, there are still elements that we need to improve, and we're working on that. And to demonstrate up to what point our public officials are resilient and can deliver in situations that are extremely difficult for Canadians, and it will give us more comfort to go forth and bring measures as necessary that could be new, but we've demonstrated that we can react quickly when the need is there.
I think one of the things we've learned over the past month is that when it needs to, government can move very quickly to help Canadians. We've seen the money from the CERB flow last week into Canadians' bank accounts across the country. That was a monumental task for our public service, for hardworking Canadians across the country who make sure that they are serving Canadians with the best that they have. And I think that lesson that when it's necessary, we can move very, very quickly and nimbly as a government is one that should inform reflections of a government going forward.
Prime Minister, Rachel Haynes here from CTV National News. You've said a number of times that testing is an essential way to flatten the curve, and you spoke to Premier Doug Ford yesterday who has also pushed for more testing in Ontario. But at the same time, we do know that there still remains a number of shortages when it comes to testing kits. How long will it be until every person who needs a test right now is able to get one?
We are continually ramping up our testing. We started earlier than other countries in terms of intensifying our testing programs. Certain jurisdictions are doing extraordinarily well on testing, like Alberta and British Columbia. Quebec is coming a long way very quickly, and Ontario is addressing some of the challenges that they've faced over the coming days. We know there is more to do, but we can certainly know that the lead that we've taken on testing is part of why we are seeing a flatter curve than other places. We've done significantly more tests in total than the United States has, and they're 10 times the size of us. So we know that Canada's testing regime has been good, but absolutely can get better, and we're going to continue to develop more testing kits, faster testing, because we know that even as we get through this first wave of COVID-19, once we are able to get into those coming months where we will be on guard, but not as shut down or paused as we are right now, testing rapidly and efficiently of as many people as possible will be a key part of that path forward. Okay. We
have made lots of progress in terms of testing in the last weeks, and we knew right off the start that to track this virus was essential, and to screen it was essential to restrict the propagation of COVID-19 and stop it. And every day we are improving our screening protocols. BC and Alberta are doing really well in terms of screening. Quebec has improved and came a long way in the last few weeks, and Alberta is addressing issues that they had with their screening protocols and the screening efforts, and we will do more because it will be an essential element of how we will be able to get through the whole year without having the current restrictions in place, but having the capacity to limit other propagation of the virus. Now, we've tested much more than in the United States, although they have 10 times our population, and we know that we need to do more, and we will continue to do so.
And over the past few weeks, you've made a number of announcements about Canadian companies and retooling facilities in order to ramp up domestic production. And you just said in one of your previous answers that the government can move quickly when it needs to. But there are still a number of Canadian companies who say that they can supply this medical equipment, but they're either getting caught in red tape or haven't heard back from provincial or the federal government. So how long will it be until these domestic supplies make it to the front lines and into hospitals?
We've had thousands and thousands of Canadian companies step up and offer to be part of supply chains for essential services, for essential equipment and medications. We are working with all of them as quickly as possible. There have had to be choices as to who we could move quickest with, who was furthest along, but we will continue to work with all companies who put up their hands to be helpful, to figure out ways they can best help. This is something in which all Canadians can pull together and are pulling together, and we will continue to do that.
Hi, Prime Minister. Crystal Oak with Global News. Is the federal government considering any measures, such as regulation or federal oversight, to ensure long-term care facilities are protected from this or future pandemics?
There have been a number of reflections and discussions on this. We've seen that British Columbia has taken strong steps to ensure the safety of long-term care workers and residents. Obviously, this is a point of vulnerability, as we've seen throughout the country in terms of the impact of COVID-19. We're continuing to work with health professionals and medical experts to make sure we're doing everything we can to protect our seniors. Okay.
We recognize that elderly's home care centers and the long-term care centers are vulnerable areas for the propagation of COVID-19, particularly for our elderlies and those working with them. That's why we are currently looking at different proposals, including BC proposals to make sure that our elders stay as protected as possible possible during these tough times.
An increasing number of healthcare workers are contracting the virus. Is that a concern for the federal government, and what is being done to help protect them?
Of course, we are tremendously worried whenever a healthcare professional contracts the virus. That is why providing adequate and significant amounts of personal protective equipment, making sure that protocols are being followed, helping provinces adjust their medical systems in ways that protect our healthcare workers is absolutely essential. We need our healthcare workers not just to stay healthy for their own benefits or the benefits of their families, but we need them to be able to stay healthy for the benefit of our entire community. But we also need them to know that we have their back as they don their protective gear, as they go into battle against this virus for the rest of us. We need to make sure they're getting all the support they need, because they are the ones that are going to save Canadians.
We recognize how it's essential to give all the support, all the help, and all the necessary equipment to our healthcare workers, and that's why we're working so hard to have the equipment they need to coordinate our approaches with the provinces and work with the provinces and territories in the ways that they want to protect their workers and their healthcare workers. We recognize that they need to be protected not only for them and their families in order to protect us in a better way, but they need to know that we're there for them. They will fight against COVID-19. They are the most at risk to keep us safe, and we need to be there for them. We need to acknowledge what they do and make sure that they can continue to do the job, this amazing job that they are doing for us.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Salima Shivji, CBC News. A briefing note prepared for your Minister of Health on March 10th actually said that the risk of the spread of the virus within Canada remains low at this time. How do you explain the misinterpretation of the threat of the pandemic at such a late stage?
I think we saw that within days we'd begun to take very serious measures to restrict travel, to encourage social distancing. We moved very quickly and earlier than some countries on countering the potential spread of the virus. At those days, the numbers of Canadians infected were still low, but we saw the potential that we are in right now, and we started to act early. And that's why the measures that we're taking right now, the significant measures that we're in right now, are keeping us, we are hopeful, on the best possible curve to get through this in the coming months. Nous avons reconnu que ça commençait
we acknowledged that it was grave and it was aggravating, and the impact and the potential for impact was growing across the country. That's why we've acted swiftly to limit people from coming and going, having people to commit to social distancing, and we took some important measures that made sure that the impact in Canada was lower and smaller than other countries that we can compare ourselves to, and we will continue to take the necessary measures so that we have as little impact and the shortest impact compared to these these times of extreme distancing.
So was that advice that there was a low risk of the spread of this flawed, and what impact did that have on your government's work to contain the virus?
Our work continued every step of the way, informed by the recommendations made by our health officials. We wanted to both make sure that there were no panics on Canadians, while at the same time getting people to take more and more significant measures, because we knew that the behavior of Canadians was the strongest way of doing what we've been able to do so far, which is slow the spread of the virus, delay it beyond where it's been in other countries, and give us the best possible chance of getting through it. As we look back, of course, there's going to be things we said, oh, we might have said this differently or that differently. There's going to be an awful lot of learning through this. But it remains that as we get through this now, as we live through the measures that we've put in place and lean on each other and hold together, we have the best chance of getting through this in the coming weeks and months by remaining true to the advice that experts are giving us, to stay home, to keep 2 meters apart, to wash our hands regularly, to not go outside unless we absolutely have to hunker down, lean on each other virtually and metaphorically, and be able to support each other through this time. We
recognize that there are always ways to say, well, we should have done this or should have said this in different times. The reality is that we took quick measures to make sure that the progression of this virus was smaller in Canada and in other countries, that we're still on track to lead us to get out of this virus quicker than other countries. We must stay on track, stay at home, keep our distance, not go outside if we don't need it, wash our hands frequently. Those are measures that will make sure that we get through this in the best way possible and rebound economically and as a society as quickly as possible. Regarding the economic rebound, as you're saying, François Legault said that some sectors of the economy that will be able to get back to in action. And you said, well, it'll take a year and a half before we get back to normal. In a federal sense, across the country, there's some sectors of the economy, or activity sectors, that will be able to get back to work soon, and if so, when? We cannot speak about the return to normal until there's no vaccination against COVID-19. But there are lots of flexibility that we can have once we will get through this first wave in which we're currently in. Now, in our models, we see that this flexibility could start this summer, but even in the fall, we will have to still have among us some measures to keep us safe, to minimize the risk of a surge of COVID-19. And this means that we will not get back to normal of what we had before COVID-19 until we have a virus. We have a vaccination against that virus. But effectively, there are some sectors of the economy, but there's some sectors of the economic activity we can get back to once we're through this first wave, and we're currently discussing with the provinces, with the different industries, with the health experts and our experts, our scientists, in order to determine what would be the best places to be flexible and how we will get out of this gradually. And on that point, I completely agree with Mr. Legault that we should be able to do it in the weeks or months coming, but we need also to think very attentively and in coordination on how we will do this. It could be discouraging to hear you yesterday. It will take a year and a half before we have a vaccine against the virus for this to get back to normal. But could you be a bit more concrete for people? When you speak about sectors that could get back, what type of sector are you talking about? When you talk about measures that will be for a year and a half, what do you talk about concretely? Just so that people can know this weekend to understand what to expect for the next few months. We are in the first phase of the virus now. We are in the propagation across our society, focused in certain areas, but we're all vulnerable to COVID-19 at this point. So we're taking measures to stay at home, not go to work if we can avoid it, not get out if we don't absolutely need it. People know very well, and the situation we're currently in, that we are putting a pause on our economy, a pause in our normal life as Canadians, and we will have to continue to do this until we get through this first wave of COVID-19, which should be the worst. Once we get through this first wave, we will be in a time and a place where we can be more flexible according to some rules. Some people will be able to get to work. Schools could start to get back. Economic activity could return, but it will be made in a way to maximize our precautions and minimize the risk of other propagation of COVID-19. At this time, we will have developed better protocols on screening, for instance. We will have technical and technological capacity to follow up contacts of those who were infected. And we will, at this time, be much better in limiting other peaks in terms of the propagation of COVID-19. It won't be normal as we knew it, but it will be. We will be able to do many things that we cannot do right now and that we'd like to do. But there will be vigilance. Continual vigilance until we get to a vaccine that will be distributed to everyone. And we don't know. Honestly, it could take 6 months, it could take a year and a half. We don't know how long it will take. But our research team are working on this as hard as possible. What we know is that our capacity to ensure that this first wave ends this summer depends entirely on us. Citizens, people who continue to stay at home, that continue to keep their distances, that continue to do what we're doing right now for many more weeks. And at this point, we could speak about flexing or having more flexibility to the rules for the summertime.
What we are in right now is the first phase of the spread of the virus. This is the phase that runs to a certain extent unchecked or difficultly checked through our society, through our communities. We're seeing new cases pop up here and there. We're seeing people struggle to handle it and to keep these measures from overwhelming our healthcare system. If we do things right, this will be the first and worst phase that we go through as a country in terms of COVID-19. If we keep these measures, these strong measures in place of staying home, of not going outside unless we absolutely have to, on keeping 2 meters apart, in being strong about social distancing, these are the things that will ensure that we will get through this first wave of the virus as quickly as possible with minimal loss of life as well. This is what we're looking for, of not overwhelming our healthcare system. And that happens if we stay strong about remaining at home for the coming weeks. According to the models we've put forward, it is possible that we will be able to be out of that wave this summer. And at that point, we will be able to talk about loosening up some of the rules that are in place, looking at particular sectors where people can go back to work, bringing in new rules around how people can interact with each other in society and get things rolling again. We'll have to be very careful about how we do that, and we will have to remain vigilant and active every single day for possible resurgences of the virus. At that point, however, we will have developed much better testing protocols because every single day we're improving them. We will develop new technologies for contact tracing, and we will all become much, much better at reacting when a possible resurgence happens. So as we look at possible resurgences over the coming months, we will be better adjusted and adapted as a society to minimize them and therefore minimize the disruption to everyday life, to our economic activity. That is the ideal scenario. But it only happens if we continue to stay strong for the coming weeks and stay, inside, keep those 2 meters apart, and be very, very careful about not allowing COVID-19 to spread further. that phase of vigilance of, easing off to a certain extent, but still being careful will continue until such a time as we have a vaccine for the virus. Researchers across Canada and around the world are working hard on this. It could take as little as 6 months. More likely it'll take a year or a year and a half, maybe even longer, but I know the best minds are working on that. So we will, once we're through this first phase, be able to get back to something that is more normal, but we will not get back to the normal that we had before, at least until we have developed a vaccine for the virus. That is the reality, but the fundamental bottom line that people can reflect on this weekend is if we stay strong in our social distancing measures now and for the coming weeks, we can see how things can start getting back to normal in the coming months. And we will be able to get through this because that's what Canadians do. We lean on each other, we support each other, and we figure out how to get through the big challenges that life throws at us. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Have a wonderful Easter.
Okay, so again, the Prime Minister will not be holding these address to the nation Saturday, Sunday, or Monday, and Sunday, Monday, he'll be spending time with his family. But he did this morning throw cold water at this moment on the idea of invoking the Emergencies Act. He says it will only be needed if current measures are not enough. So whether the act is triggered or not, on the ground, this is clearly an emergency, and Avery Haynes is in Toronto. Avery, an emergency, especially in long-term care homes linked to half of Canada's deaths. Now, you've had a chance to speak to staffers on the inside, reluctant to go public, but most startling to me is that they're only wearing that protective gear after a patient has tested positive. Is that going to change?
Well, the Prime Minister described long-term care facilities just now as a point of vulnerability. I don't want to put a hierarchy on suffering, but I would say that what's happening at long-term care facilities and nursing homes across this country is an absolute devastation for a generation of Canadians, and obviously the loved ones of those who are forced to say goodbye to their loved ones not with them. And, I've heard in Ontario now long-term care home workers can wear protective gear, but can you imagine that we're having this conversation about what they should be wearing a month after our first case? It just seems extraordinary to me.
It's such a good point, that famous quote of civilization is judged the way we've always heard by how it treats its weakest members, then this really is a travesty when we're hearing about 4 people per room and still using a curtain as some kind of protection. But you also have been able to sort of tap into the challenges in this country when it comes to funeral services, reduced funeral services, the change in the way we say goodbye to our loved ones now.
Right. I mean, there's no more. This COVID-19 has really been a disease of loneliness. People are dying alone. Their loved ones are grieving alone. And funeral homes have had to ban big funerals, obviously. So it's being done online and through Skype. One of the sort of most distasteful parts of all of this is that there's been an absolute surge in body bags. I spoke to a distributor of medical equipment in this country who says that, I think in a similar way, he was saying that there was a panic for toilet paper by consumers. Hospitals and long-term care facilities are just surging the purchase of body bags so that now there's a 4 to 6 month backlog. So anybody who doesn't have them won't get them for 4 to 6 months.
Wow. And that's in this country. I want to also talk about the story you covered last night on the national news, the shining a spotlight on some of the world's most tragic places. Even in the best of times, these places are tragic. Yemen, Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. Is containment of this virus happening on any level in those places?
The word I heard from humanitarian workers again was time is running out. And, we saw the modeling in this country of what would have happened had we not taken strict measurements. I mean, really horrifying numbers. Now imagine in Yemen where, COVID-19 is so powerful, it's actually managed to halt a war, at least for 2 weeks. They've announced a ceasefire. The Saudi-led coalition forces have announced a 2-week ceasefire. But that country's healthcare system has been devastated by 5 years of targeted attacks on healthcare workers and on hospitals. They have not one case in Yemen, Lisa, not one case of COVID-19, but they only have 2 testing sites for 28 million people. Cox's Bazar, you mentioned, in Bangladesh, the world's largest refugee camp. When the workers that I spoke to said that when COVID-19 gets through there, it will be an absolute nightmare. And, it's imperative for us when we think about this as a global war, we are in a world war, that we act together, because it's not just for altruistic reasons that we need to stop this in other parts of the world. It will come back here unless we help.
And we're looking at these pictures, Avery, of, all this debate going on in North America about whether or not we should have a cloth mask made. And these people are standing in these food lineups. These are the people who've been through Ebola, HIV, and they've all got some kind of primitive mask on, knowing that anything that can protect is worth a try. Just devastating on such a global level. Thank you, Avery. We are going to go to Atlantic Canada now. Todd Battis joins us. Todd, we're learning today that the RCMP have been asked to help in enforcing the Federal Quarantine Act. So first of all, what kind of a role will the RCMP play now that they weren't already playing?
Yeah, and this was the order that was brought in March 25th, Lisa. So it's been enacted for some time now, but the RCMP, as you mentioned, asked to coordinate and to enforce this. So think about the RCMP members now patrolling areas, point of entry into Canada, so the airports, anyone coming across the border, to basically, tell them to reinforce the message that they have to isolate and quarantine for 14 days coming into the country. Again, that's been going on, but we haven't seen the RCMP law enforcement playing a role yet, so that'll be a big change. And also, Nova Scotia's Premier, he has been showing some serious frustration yesterday, specifically about whether people are taking the physical distancing seriously. So what are some of the new restrictions coming down there? Well, he made a really stark comment where he said, how many Nova Scotians will it take for people to die for people to get the message? So, going into an Easter weekend, he was really upset, and he basically singled out Costco in particular here in Halifax, one of their stores, because they say these retailers aren't doing enough to keep people physically distanced. And he said, in fact, the government might have to do something to ensure that happens, and that could come at the cost of some of these individual retail outlets. There have been other proposals put in. We know that there's some problems with people still going into parks and the confusion about what's a park and what's a path, and a lot of fines being handed out to individuals, a bit of blowback on social media. So it's, the struggle is very much real here. And, Canadians are really trying to seriously wrap their minds around how different, not just the spring, but the summer is going to be. And I thought Dr. Strang, Nova Scotia's Chief Medical Officer of Health, he really didn't mince his words either. So how gradual will these restrictions be lifted? Well, it's not unlike what the Prime Minister said, I think, Lisa, that it could be a very different summer. And Nova Scotia, Canada's ocean's playground, people come here to get to the beaches and to vacation in the summer, and it's going to take on a very different look. And in particular with summer industries, right? You think about agriculture and the fishery, fish plants require a lot of temporary foreign workers. They're going to be allowed into the province to fulfill those roles, but they're going to have to quarantine for 14 days. And when it comes to the fishing industry, it could be very difficult, because Dr. Strang said, yes, they'll be allowed to go out and fish, but when they come in to dock, to tie up, to take deliveries of things like bait, fishermen are physically going to have to stay on their boats. It's going to make it very tough to go about their business, Lisa. We're going to need a new rule book for that for this summer. Todd, thanks so much for that. Let's go to Los Angeles now, and Tom Walters joins us for a picture of what's happening in the United States. Before we leave, Tom, let's begin in New York. The big news this morning, Governor Cuomo saying that there has been a dramatic decline in the rate of hospitalization. So this is some promising news going into this holiday weekend?
Yes, it is, Lisa. When the governor of New York is cautiously optimistic, that's really the first credible optimism we're getting from that hard-hit state. The number of fatalities there dropped slightly yesterday from the day before, but that is not as statistically significant as what we're seeing, as you say, with hospitalizations, because those foreshadow the mortality rate a week or 2 weeks down the road. That drop in the number of hospitalizations is the indicator, to the governor of New York at least, that they have now got a crushed curve, if you will, that they can see that the arc has been flattened. They believe that those hospitals in New York that have just been hanging on by their fingernails, bracing for an onslaught that would overwhelm them, may in fact get through this without being overwhelmed. But the grim reality in a state that has had now nearly 8,000 deaths is seen in a particularly sad, heartbreaking scene at Hart Island, which is where Potter's Field is in New York. This is where typically those whose bodies go unclaimed are laid to rest. They normally have about 25 burials there a week, but with the difficulty of people getting to loved ones, and with the many whose families or don't have families to claim them, there's now been a 5-fold increase in burials there. There was some talk about temporary interment, but whether or not any of these folks will later receive a more formal burial remains to be seen. Avery was talking about the loneliness of COVID, and here's the picture of it in these mass burials, mass graves of those whose bodies have gone unclaimed.
And it's true. I mean, these are the things we've seen in Haiti, we've seen in the developing world, we've seen in conflict zones, but to see that in New York, it's a stunning thing. And we know the virus can hit anybody, Tom, but we look at these numbers and it is not affecting every community equally. A lot of talk in the U.S. right now on racial disparity when it comes to COVID-19 and how it seems to be attacking the African-American community in a more intense manner.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, look at the city of Chicago, where African Americans make up about 1/3 of the population, but they are 70% of the mortality from COVID-19. And what this really is doing in many ways, Lisa, is shining a light on inequities that have existed for a very long time in American healthcare and economics. I mean, what you have is a population that is in many ways more at risk and has had less access to healthcare.
Okay, Tom, thank you so much for that. Before we go, I want to come back to our infectious disease specialist, Dr. Abdu Sharkawi. And Doctor, I just want to play a little bit of video we saw this morning, the ICU team at Markham Stouffville Hospital letting off a little steam with a Friday dance party. I mean, it must just, I know you've had a chance to look at this footage also.
Yeah, that's from Dr. Anand Dubey and his wife, Dr. Lavina Munshi, were actually trainees here at the University of Toronto. I had the pleasure of working with both of them, so I'm very proud of them. And I think this highlights the importance of making sure that we do whatever we can as healthcare workers to minimize our stress. Turn off your screens whenever you can. If you're not on call, turn off your phone. I try and stay physically active. I play basketball with my 3 boys. It's the highlight of my day. I eat with my family whenever I can, and I try and laugh. Any way you can laugh, any way you can see the lighter side of life is going to help. I would encourage everybody to share as much love and laughter as you can. We'll get through this.
Such a very great point. And as we go into this long weekend for Canadians, and we know they're going to get a break from the Prime Minister's daily messaging, any other sort of, I mean, we still have to maintain the physical distancing and we don't want to see crowds in parks and this sort of thing, but give us, in your wise way, some instruction, if you will, as we move into this holiday weekend.
It's okay to leave your home, but if you're leaving your home, stay very close and stay with your own family, the people who live within your 4 walls, nothing more than that. Take the time to reflect and reach out to everybody else that you love and care about through other means. It's temporary. We're going to get through this. I know Canada can do this.
Okay, and I hope this is advice. I hope, Dr. Sharkawi, that you are also taking, and the people in your hospital. We thank you so much for being with us this week, helping us better understand just what exactly is happening inside the hospital system. Dr. Sharkawi, I thank you. And that concludes our special report for this Good Friday. As you heard, the Prime Minister will not be holding these daily briefings over the Easter weekend. So when he is back on Tuesday, we will also be back in this time slot. I want to wish you all a safe and peaceful Easter. It is obviously going to be a very different one for all of us. You know, we'll be apart from our loved ones altogether in some cases. But I'm going to quote Beetle George Harrison right now, and remember, all things must pass. And the more we stay apart right now, the faster we will be together in the future. So, of course, as always, CTV News Channel and ctvnews.ca will have all of the press conferences, all of the latest information as it becomes available. Omar Sachedina will be here tonight for a comprehensive wrap-up on CTV National News. I'm Lisa Laflamme. For everyone here in the National Newsroom, thank you so much for joining us. We'll end our special coverage this morning with the Rev 52 Choir in Calgary practicing physical distancing. Tribute to love. Bye, everybody.